Hello there guys, and welcome back to the channel. So today's video is going to be Longshot review, and I'm going to be trying a new format of my reviews where I'm going to spend first half of the video making the champion look good and make it flashy and make it nice with some gameplay examples, and then we're going to spend the second half of the video actually going over all of the downsides and kind of trying to reach a realistic conclusion on where I rate this champion in particular. So that being said, let's start with where we often start, a simple basic damage test in Realm of Legends. So this is pre-recorded footage I'm going to be commenting over. So I'm using Longshot with Suicides, which is important to keep in mind, which I'm going to talk later on. But there is no Mystic Dispersion, and obviously Winter Soldier is a matchup where are no buffs involved as well. So the fact that he's like a Mystic champion or he would gain extra damage from buffs is also non-existent. But in this case, we can see that Longshot's base kind of like primary gameplay is relatively simple. You want to get to your 5 of your bad karma as an opponent. I did not activate Pure Heart up until the very last moment. Now that I did it, now I dropped my level 2, as we can see, did substantial amount of damage. But to capitalize on that damage, you basically kind of want to spam as many level 2s, as many heavy attacks as you can whilst that Incinerate is active. And yeah, that is how you get your bulk of damage, and then you kind of like rinse and repeat. And obviously if your Fate Seal is active, every time opponent would happen to gain a buff, or for every buff he already had, he would gain additional chunk of that passive Incinerate damage. And we can see that Winter Soldier is going down extremely quickly. At this point we are 29 hits in. We're punishing his special attack with heavy attack just because we can, and 33 hits in. Winter Soldier is at 26% of his health. So Longshot certainly has one of the highest potentials for damage per second in the game, and this is on a relatively average matchup. Most important thing in every single matchup of Longshot is obviously that opponents are not Incinerate immune to Fate Seal, and the fact that he can spam heavy attacks significantly improves his damage output. Basically, it's about as important as having buffs on opponent. Now that being said, so this video is over, so we can see that it took like 47 hits to deal with that Winter Soldier, which is extremely good result. Now the second thing, obviously, what everybody does and has done and will do, obviously, since Longshot is a Mystic champion, he gains extra damage when opponents have buffs. I will do the same. Cheap underhanded resistor node tactics, and we can see how quickly Longshot's able to melt these opponents. Another thing that is very extremely important to note, that Longshot gains increased amount of power gain for each bad karma on opponent. That significantly improves his speed of reaching that level 2. Therefore, in theory, Longshot's much more viable in a lot of different scenarios for matchups where it's important for you to reach that level 2 extremely quickly. And here we can see that yeah, opponents are absolutely melting away, and here we're going for a level 1 at 25 hits. 6.3 opponent goes down. Obviously that is with the resistor node, and that is pretty much as perfect of conditions as we can possibly try and find for Longshot. But hey, if we want to make a champion look badass, then this is where we're gonna bring this Mystic Prince Charming. But yeah, so again, same idea here. Once again, we have class advantage, opponents on resistor node, and I'm just gonna be having an absolute fun here with Drax. We're gonna go for level 2. As soon as level 2 is dropped, we can see that his health immediately goes down to halfway straight after level 2, plus that Incinerate whilst it's active. Every time I strike him, he would gain a buff, and that deals a whole much more damage. Basically, you get the point. Any matchup where opponents can gain a lot of buffs, he has a good chance to shine. However, there are other conditions to kind of like check up on. I think I'm going to showcase one more. I have a couple more fights recorded there, but then we're going to move on to the next video, and we're going to show some other abilities Longshot has before we kind of turn it down a notch and bring it back to reality. But here again, Yondu. So again, very similar match. I think I'm going to make a mistake in this matchup. I think I'm going to misshoot at the point where I thought I'm going to be at level 2, but I'm going to turn out to be still at level 1, and that's going to make the fight a bit longer. So there will be, yes, here we go. I shouldn't have thrown that level 1. That was a mistake, and that just made the fight all that longer, but hey, it's all good. I'm just going to catch that Yondu on the next fight. Sorry, next special attack. So here at this point I reach my level 2. He has plenty of buffs active. He had plenty of bad karma. You can see that level 2 does a whole lot of damage. Here I'm going to be trying to build to my level 1 as quickly as I can, so I can inflict additional passive bleeds, I think. And yeah, the fight is over. Now, Longshot's mechanics themselves are quite straightforward. He's not the most complicated champion. All of his base damage is literally built in level 2, where you place Incinerate on opponent, which is not a passive Incinerate. And once you have Incinerate opponent, your Fate Seal activates, and then for every bad karma or every buff opponent would have, you deal this passive Incinerate damage, which is definitely a really nice handy thing to have, especially when you are trying to bypass Safeguard, when you're trying to bypass Rage. It's kind of pretty much custom built large amount of damage that can get through all of these damage mitigation and damage limiter nodes. You can see again at this point, nice level 2. Phoenix goes down extremely quickly. For every buff she would gain, we're just burning her down, and yeah, that's about it. I think where is the next clip? Next clip would be Medusa. This is the Medusa in 6.4 on Footloose node, and then there's going to be Stark Enhanced Spider-Man node. Now, why am I showing this as well? It's because it's quite important, because Longshot has inbuilt abilities where he has a basically chance to take over opponents' unstoppables, and that also works on the Footloose node. And obviously, if you happen to have your opponent Fate Seal, then you are guaranteed to take over their unstoppable. Fortunately, it doesn't quite work with the weight effects, but hey, you can see that if she launches her special attack, then that unstoppable buff is going to jump to the Longshot, which is kind of funny, which is kind of tricky, but yeah, so he has like additional way of dealing with unstoppable buffs. But level 1 there, and the fight was over. Now we're going to be moving on to Stark Enhanced Spider-Man, and again, these are fights where obviously opponents have access to some buffs, but it's not like it's resistor nodes, not extensive amount of buffs. They are simply triggering buffs when they are throwing special attacks, which plenty of champions do. So overall, all in all, in kind of like vanilla scenarios, Longshot has relatively decent amount of champions he can be good against, but obviously keep in mind that all of this damage is Incinerate damage, and all of this damage comes from level 2s, which is what we're gonna talk about just in a moment. But before we do that, I'm just gonna quickly finish off this Stark Enhanced Spider-Man fight, because why not? Dropping that level 2 again. Here we can see Stark Enhanced Spidey is halfway down. Now at this point I should have just awaited it all. We can see that I have also got an unstoppable buff. Why not? But yeah, couple of heavy attacks into level 1, and that fight should have been over. I should have just finished the fight off there with a level 1, but hey, that's a slight mistake from my part. Either way, let's move on to the last clip, and last clip, I believe this is again 6.4 x23 with mirror image, Lionheart, and some other nodes. But the point being is, obviously, these nullification abilities Longshot has on level 2 are quite handy to deal with regeneration and many different abilities depending on conditions. And obviously mirror image, the fact that the opponent's going to try and copy your buffs such as dexterity, will only help you again in these kind of situations. And we can see that he's able to finish out a lot of Act 6 fights extremely quickly. But here comes the catch. He's only able to do them as quickly with Suicide Masteries, because Longshot has a real big love-hate relationship with Suicide Masteries, and he's quite dependent on that attack boost provided by Suicide Masteries, but he's not really suicide friendly at all. In this case, he's able to carry Suicide relatively well, because obviously the synergies that I'm using with Nick Fury and Goldpool, that increase his special damage slightly, and that obviously heals him up. Therefore, if he finishes fights out in a couple of special attacks, his recall damage and the damage he would take from Suicide Masteries is not as significant. But he has a lot of drawbacks, which we absolutely have to discuss if I want to give you kind of like objective valuation of Longshot and where he lies. So we're going to start with the first and perhaps most common drawback these days, because he, just as plenty of other champions, have about 90% of his damage on his special attacks. Any nodes, any champion abilities that limit his abilities to throw these special attacks will absolutely destroy Longshot to a point where he's going to be Groot levels of attacker. I'm not even exaggerating. I'm quite sure that even Iron Patriot could outdamage Longshot when it comes to actual kind of like damage you throw. All of that massive, beautiful damage comes from those passive Incinerate ticks, and all of that is basically kind of like gotten to Y special 2. So in case any fight where he's unable to reach special 2 or is heavily hindered of reaching special 2, he's kind of automatically disqualified for. So he's extremely tricky to use, let's say in power struggle nodes. He's extremely tricky to use in plague mine nodes on different conditions, so on and so forth. So you have to keep that in mind, that first and foremost, no special attacks. Longshot kind of stinks. Now we're gonna move on to the second one, and second one is Incinerate immune champions and nodes, because obviously there is plenty of champions who have Incinerate immunity at this point. Incinerate and Shock and Cold Snap are kind of like 3 new generation immunities that champions largely are being bestowed upon these days. Initially it was Bleed and Poison, obviously, then it was like the Robot Uprising, and now currently in these days every other champion is Incinerate, Shock, or Cold Snap immune. So in any kind of like given case, if opponent is immune to Incinerate, why his own natural immunity, let's say, I don't know, Night Thrasher, Longshot sucks against that because he can't deal any of that damage, because that damage is directly tied to Incinerate. Or obviously if opponent is debuff immune, then even worse, you cannot even place that Incinerate on opponent while you're level 2, and obviously you have no damage there as well. So another kind of like subset of champions that you need to be extremely careful for. And we're going to talk about other Mystic champions, and many of the Mystic champions who can benefit from opponents having a lot of buffs and then go absolute beyond god tier damage do not have this limitation. For instance, Morningstar. Morningstar is so much more free to dish that damage on buff heavy matchups, because Morningstar does not have to worry about any immunities at all whatsoever. And let's go on to point number 3, Shrug Off abilities, because that Fate Seal and all of that magical damage again is only possible whilst the opponent has an Incinerate buff active, and that's also as long as the Fate Seal abilities will be active. Now, not to mention that there are nodes that prevent opponents from being Fate Sealed. Additionally, there are champions who cannot be Fate Sealed, like the Thing, for instance. There are quite popular increase in nodes that just work against these debuff effects, such as Tenacity. Tenacity seems to be popping up everywhere, starting from like new AW nodes in Act 6, in Incursions, pretty much everywhere you can see Tenacity, which is quite simple ability to shrug off a debuff. But if you give that ability to random champions, then Longshot is again quite useless. Not to mention that we already have an increased amount of champions who can shrug off that stuff, like, I don't know, Mole Man, we have Ghost, we have Korg, we have a whole bunch of other champions who can simply shrug off that Incinerate and shut off all of Longshot damage. Then we also have champions who have the debuffs expire quicker, like for instance Rogue, right? A Rogue makes all of the Incinerate expire quicker, therefore the window of opportunity there is so much shorter as well. Additionally, we have nodes such as Rapid Metabolism that also would prevent Longshot from functioning properly, because that Incinerate would expire instantly. And there are a lot of tricky nodes for Longshot to kind of like take in consideration. And another kind of very vital thing is that Longshot struggles a lot in stun immune matchups, and especially in matchups where opponent heavy attacks are quite difficult to punish. Now, thank God, Longshot's heavy attack animation is quite far-reaching and it's quite quick, and therefore there is a large amount of heavy attacks that you can actually punish. But on the downside, with Act 6 attack values, you end up taking a lot of chip damage if you have to block bait heavy attacks, but landing those heavy attacks is so vital to kind of like further increase Longshot damage output. Then that is again one more thing that you need to take in consideration. Limber is not Longshot's friend, stun immunity is not Longshot's friend, so it's just one of those nodes that is very common pretty much in every single piece of content that we go, and that Longshot innately will struggle with and will be significantly harder to use up against. Now, and the fifth point is the fact that his trump kind of like matchups are the same as pretty much any other Mystic champion. Now, yes, he has one of the highest damage kind of like potentials there, but with all of the limitations that we have just discussed, the fact that his damage is tied to Incinerate, the fact that you need champions where you can kind of like land these debuffs and keep these debuffs on, the fact that you should be able to land heavy attacks, I suppose in buff heavy matchups, in buff heavy matchups. Heavy attacks are not as important, but still, point being is almost every other or every third Mystic champion will be going kind of like God mode in the same matchups that Longshot does. For instance, Morningstar will absolutely shatter anything on Resistor node. Doom will be fantastic for Footloose node, so on and so forth. So pretty much every top kind of like dominant Mystic champion can deal with the same matchups that Longshot does. Now the question is, what champion do you need more? Do you need a champion that might be slightly flashier than his counterpart, but his counterpart would be able to deal with a lot more different matchups with added extra amounts of utility? And Longshot is the flashy champion. Longshot is the champion that can produce arguably some of the prettiest numbers in the game, but the amount of matchups where he will be able to do so is significantly much more limited than that of Dr. Doom, Morningstar, Black Widow, Clairvoyant, so on and so forth. So that's important for you to kind of like wait out. What exactly are you looking for in the champion? Do you want just that flash and finesse, or do you want somebody who's a sturdy workhorse and will be able to answer the call of need as often as possible? And last thing, again, what I mentioned is the fact that he has no immunities, plus he has a love-hate relationship with Suicide Masteries. Because he has no immunities, his damage does rely on being able to land special attacks, albeit not that many, so he can still handle Suicide Masteries to a degree for X amount of fights, but obviously with no immunities, no way of healing himself. It's only a matter of time till he will gas out, but he does definitely need that attack increase in order to be able to perform to the extent you saw earlier in the video, because without Suicide Masteries, obviously his attack is much lower. Therefore, all of those passive incinerates will burn for so much less, and you will need to repeat the same cycles. That, for instance, I was able to finish out fights with one level 2 and a level 1 in 6.3. You would arguably need to go for like 2 or 3 level 2s to gain the same effect there. So Longshot is a champion that kind of depends on the attack boost from the Suicide Masteries, but at the same time doesn't really like running them too much. So that is something to keep in mind, that he kind of needs a bit of special treatment. Probably attack boosts are always encouraged for him to be able to do the things that he is meant to do. And now we're going to talk about something good, though. I want to finish this kind of like overview on some of the things that I personally find redeeming in Longshot. And first and foremost is the fact that he's not reliant on Mystic Dispersion at all. Even quite contrary, you could argue that Mystic Dispersion arguably makes him worse, because it often would make him kind of like overshoot into level 3 territory. Now, Longshot has his own mechanic of gaining extra power, because for each bad karma on opponent, Longshot basically gains 12% of the power opponent is getting. So if you have 5 bad karmas on opponent, for every bar of power you give to your opponent by hitting them, you basically gain 0.6 bars of power. So that is a significant amount of power increase on, and you end up gaining power much quicker than your opponent does. And the thing with Longshot is, it's not even important to spam these level 2s back to back, because you need to keep an eye on how many bad karmas you have on your opponent, how many buffs they have, and sometimes too much power with Longshot is actually a drawback, or if you get pushed to level 3, which is quite useless, to be fair. So Mystic Dispersion is definitely whatsoever not at all needed for Longshot in pretty much any matchup that I can think of. Maybe at 1 in some matchups or 2, but definitely not more than that. And obviously, as we witnessed previously, Longshot has one of the highest damage per second possible potentials in game. Even in a fight like Winter Soldier, where Winter Soldier gets no buffs at all whatsoever, he was able to finish that fight sub 50 hits, and that is already kind of like up there with the best, most hard-hitting champions in the game. Additionally, he can significantly increase his damage output, if not even double it, in matchups where opponents are gaining a lot of buffs and a lot of buffs quickly. Therefore, that all being said, it is really fun and it is really cool to have access to a champion that who is able to destroy opponents as quickly as Longshot is. And lastly, the fact that he's immune basically to ability accuracy reduction. His base ability accuracy is like 300%, is quite savage. It is always useful, just that extra guarantee that you know his abilities will trigger. There's no RNG element involved, and yeah, even against champions like Domino or wherever, where there is a chance that your abilities will fail, it's very, very reassuring to know that they will in fact trigger, and his ability accuracy cannot be reduced. But unfortunately, all of that information put together, and I'm going to jump again to in-game screen. Currently, I am already in the game, and as a random test for Longshot, for instance, we're going to jump in one of the 6.4 quests that will effectively summarize what I think for Longshot. So there are 6 paths in this quest. We're gonna ignore what I need for boss fight. We're just gonna look at the paths themselves. So let's take a look at the first path and what nodes we have here. Stun immunity and spite. Definitely not for Longshot, because stun immunity is gonna make these fights extremely difficult. And obviously the matchups there are also relatively tricky, but stun immune path is not a path I would personally want to bring Longshot, especially if I have to deal with stuff like Spider-Gwen, Thor Ragnarok, blah blah blah, so on and so forth. So Longshot is not really great for that path overall. Now next path is going to be here. We have Short Burst Lockdown. Oh, look at that, it's poison. Longshot has no immunity, so you cannot use him on this lane. Next lane we have Armor Break immunity. Stunning Reflection, can't really use Longshot. Because obviously you do rely on parrying and heavying, and that's how you build up Longshot initially. So yeah, I possibly could do some fights with Longshot there, but I definitely wouldn't want to bring him in kind of like willfully. Clapback and Feats of Power. Clapback again incinerates. Whenever you inflict Incinerate on an opponent. Longshot is not immune, he relies on inflicting Incinerate. Now, it probably wouldn't be the end of the world, because I don't think those Incinerates hit that hard, but it would definitely chip down Longshot quite significantly. And yeah, it's not really a path I would want to bring Longshot, knowing that my gameplay will involve me placing Incinerate on myself and taking significant amount of damage. Now, again, next path, Special Bias and 100% increased power gain. Longshot has no power control abilities, so no, that will be a pass. And the last path here would be True Strike and Aggression Cruelty, which is like the quote-unquote easy path, which is a basic path, which is, yes, I can use Longshot here, but I can use pretty much any other champion as well. So Longshot doesn't really answer, and out of 6 lanes, I can only bring him in to the one that's arguably pretty much the easiest. And we can do the same type of like experiment in a different quest, and I'm sure that there are some quests where he will answer 2 paths or something like that. But the point being is, in much more often than not, the node combinations that you end up facing typically just flat out disqualify Longshot, unless there are like very specific set of circumstances involved. I think I could mention here was, it's not this one, but whichever, we can take a look here. Acid Wash, Toxic Ant, Toxic Hunt, EMP modification, no shock immunity, no bueno. Vigor, Vigorous Assault, Thunderstruck, no shock, no bueno. Transducer, Static Blast, Special Chaos Inversion. Now this is a path where he could potentially do quite well because of his increased power gain. He might be able to reach special attacks before the opponent. But Special Chaos Inversion obviously would still be tricky for him to evade. And yeah, I think this line Aggression, Fury, Counter Strike, Unblockable. Fair enough, this one he would probably rock quite well. Safeguard, Backlash, Pulse, Rapid Metabolism, pretty much forget about it, even though he is very good for bypassing Safeguard. Rapid Metabolism will shrug off his Incinerate extremely quickly, so he will hardly be able to exploit it. So the point being is, Longshot is a great champion. Longshot is a very, very fun, flashy champion. Unfortunately for him, there are Mystic champions who do everything he does almost as good, plus a lot more. Like Morningstar has all of these buck cheese mechanics in built, plus obviously Morningstar can be an absolute savage and deal with much more because of her bleed immunity, because of the perfect block chance, because of that huge heal. And then we have Doom. Yes, Doom will not be able to finish opponents as quick, but Doom has shock immunity. He's so much kind of like bigger as a tank. and he has much better power control and a lot of different things going for him. Clairvoyant can heal, can power control, has pretty much all the immunities, and yeah, so there we go. That is what I think of Longshot personally, more or less. He's very fun, flashy champion. From practicality aspect, I have never really found true value for him, or him to be the one champion that I absolutely am happy to have when I'm dealing with problem. It's quite contrary. Typically, I only bring him in if I want to have a bit of fun and want to cheese some stuff up. So Longshot is definitely not a bad champion. He is quite great, but unfortunately, there are just better Mystic options out there who do more than he does. Now, this video is quite long, but I hope you guys enjoyed it. And if you have managed to stay this far, obviously, then you must get your baby Yoda. So yeah, hit that like button, hit that sub button, hit all the buttons, and I'm gonna catch you guys soon. See ya.